Okay, it's been a really long time since we did this, but remember that book? But I Know I Love You? We recorded like a couple chapters months ago. So let's edit that and put it out. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully everything's there. Anyway, hope you enjoy it too.
Green-eyed girl. I could barely sleep that night. My thoughts were filled with images of a dark-haired, green-eyed woman. I'll admit, this was new for me. Although I had always thought I would be a dad and a husband someday, as I said, I wasn't in any hurry. In fact, I think my mom had just about given up hope on me, but, as I said, there was, and still is, something special about Camre. The next morning, I drove to my first appointment. All the while I was installing the windshield, I was thinking about Camre's number in my phone. I must have started to call her at least a dozen times, but shoved the phone back in my pocket each time. That night, after work, I looked at her number and almost pushed the call button, but stopped myself. I thought about texting her, but that didn't seem quite right either. I wanted to hear her voice, not just read a text from her. I'm sort of embarrassed to say that I went back and forth about calling or even texting for 3 days. As I look back, I think I waited at least one day too long to get in touch. Although Camre can't remember, I know her well enough to realize that she had probably already written me off as one of those guys. In my defense, I didn't want to seem too pushy or too eager, but the real reason was that I was afraid she was going to turn me down. Now, getting turned down isn't the end of the world most of the time, but I knew that Camre was different, and if she didn't want to see me again, I didn't know what I was going to do. I even thought about showing up at her place of work, but then decided that would make me seem like a stalker. So I just kept putting off making the call. Finally, I worked up the courage to call. Sometimes girls think it's easy for guys to make the first move, but trust me, when you really like someone, it's not that easy at all. As her phone rang, I realized I was holding my breath. What if she didn't answer? What kind of message could I leave? Should I even leave a message? Should I call back? After what seemed like an awfully long time, she picked up. Hi. Hi there. This is Steve. Remember me? We met at Legends and went to a bonfire. The words tumbled out awkwardly. Yes, I remember. Her voice sounded a little cool, and I kicked myself for waiting so long to call. Hey, I really enjoyed talking with you, and I wondered if you'd like to have dinner with me sometime. She paused. I don't think I started to breathe until she said, yeah, I'd like that. What did you have in mind? I suggested that I pick her up the next night about 7. Is there someplace you'd like to go? I heard a little bit of a laugh in her voice as she said, no, you choose. Surprise me. Looking back, that was just classic Camre. Always up for an adventure, always ready to try something new. It's that spirit, that inner confidence that first drew me to her and still amazes me today. It's that determination to grasp life with both hands that has enabled us to get where we are today. It's the reason that Camre has defied all the odds. To say that the next day passed both all too quickly and way too slowly is an understatement. When I finished my last job, I raced home to shower and get ready. I knew that this wasn't going to be just any old first date, so I wanted to make the best impression possible. I probably spent more time getting ready than I ever had for any date, except maybe prom in high school. I decided on khaki slacks, a blue-gray colored shirt, brown dress shoes, and my watch. I always wear a watch, even in this age of cell phones. Once I was dressed, I thought about what else I could do to show that I was really interested without being too forward. I decided that going old school by bringing a bouquet of flowers would be a good idea. I wasn't exactly sure what to get. Roses seemed a little too much, and a houseplant seemed sort of silly, so I chose a large mixed bouquet with orange, yellow, red, and blue flowers that I spotted at the local flower shop. They were bright and cheerful, and as sappy as it sounds, they sort of reminded me of Camre. The florist wrapped them in green paper, and I laid them carefully on the passenger seat as I drove to her house. Camre lived with her cousin on a circular development not too far from my place. As I turned onto the road, I realized that my heart was pounding a little faster than usual. "It's okay, Steve," I told myself. "Everything is going to be okay. You've got this." I pulled up the driveway and looked in the rearview mirror. I shaved my head at that time, so I knew that my hair was going to be okay at least. I made sure that my collar was straight and reminded myself that this was what I had been waiting for since the bonfire. I picked up the flowers, making sure that they hadn't left a mess by dripping on the seat, and hopped out of my Cherokee. I walked up to the front door, put the flowers behind my back, rang the bell, and waited. She must have been close by because it opened almost immediately. She was wearing a dress. She'd worn jeans the day we met, and she looked even more beautiful than I remembered. I don't know exactly what I said, which is probably a good thing. I know I handed her the flowers and was both relieved and pleased when her face lit up with the most amazing smile. No matter what has happened over these past years, she still has that amazing smile to this day. I remember one time during one of the seemingly endless doctor's appointments that followed her brain injury, she was sitting on a hospital chair with electrodes all over her head when I snapped a picture. I can recognize the pain and fear in her eyes, but despite it all, she is giving me a thumbs up and that always radiant smile. That's Camre through and through. No matter what happens, she finds the best in it. She took the flowers and put them in a vase. All of a sudden, a big 120-pound, big, fluffy black bear of a dog ambled up and slobbered all over my pants. I had tried so hard to make a good impression, and now I was covered in dog slobber. It was the first time, but it certainly wasn't the last. I think I'm destined to live the rest of my life with big, slobbery dogs that eat everything in sight. Camre laughed as I went to the kitchen and wiped off the drool as best I could before escorting her to my truck. Our first date was at Redwood Steakhouse and Brewery in Flint, Michigan. From the outside, it looks like an old-fashioned lodge, and on the inside, it reminds me of a really fancy cabin out in the woods. It definitely has a Michigan feel to it. I picked it because I wanted to take her to a nice place with good food, but I didn't want it to be over the top either. Remember what I said about it not being all that easy for guys? Well, deciding where to go on a first date can be one of the challenging moments, especially when the girl has said she wanted to be surprised. On the drive over there, we picked up our conversation just where we had left off at the bonfire. Once or twice, I kicked myself for having waited so long to call, but then I'd glance over at Camre, and I knew that things were happening just the way they should. Redwoods turned out to be the perfect place for a first real date. In fact, it's still one of our favorite restaurants. As I look back, the thing I remember the most is thinking how lucky I felt to have paid attention to the voice that kicked me off the couch. I was raised in the Lutheran church and have always believed in God, but I'm convinced that the voice I heard that night came directly from heaven. It's the one and only time I've ever heard anything like it, but it was unmistakably directed toward me, and it wasn't going to take no for an answer. I ordered a steak and asparagus, and Camre ordered chicken. It's funny how details like that stick in your mind. even though I still like steak and Camry still likes chicken, every memory of our first date is gone for her. No matter how many times I remind her, no matter how many times we talk about it, Camry doesn't remember a single thing about that night. She knows we went on a date, but she can't remember it. It's difficult to explain what it's like because her brain injury is so rare. She knows that things have happened, but she can't remember them. For instance, she knows she worked as a service rep, but she can't remember anything about the job. What she does know and can remember are emotions she has felt. Everything else is lost to her devastating brain injury. So she knows we had a first date, and she knows we had a good time because she can feel it. Now, when we go to Redwoods and I tell her that this was where we went on our first date, she smiles and nods her head. She doesn't remember anything from that night, but as she tells me, she knows she's glad she went. But back to that evening. The night went all too fast, and when I took her home, I was already planning our next date. We stood on the porch, I kissed her, and that was it. I knew she was the one for me. Fortunately, Camry was as ready for the relationship as I was. We made plans to meet the next day, and the next, and the next. From that day on, we were together as much as possible. I would come to her place after work, and we would hang out together on the weekends. At the time, I was living with a buddy, but I had already decided I wanted to look for a place of my own. Camry was ready to have her own place as well, so I began looking for a house to buy. About 8 months after we met, I found a place on a lake that I really liked. Fortunately, Camry was as excited to live on a lake as I was, so when I was ready to move into the house, it just seemed natural that she and her dog would move in too. It was never a question that Camry and her Newfoundland were a package deal. Camry and I both loved being in the middle of all the trees and wildlife, but her dog was in heaven with all the new smells and places to explore. Like most couples, we had some adjusting to do once we actually were living together all the time. After we'd been together for a few months, we had an argument. Now, it wasn't a huge argument, but it was big enough that we decided we needed to put the brakes on our relationship for a little while. We decided we both needed to think about what we wanted, so Camry went back to her parents' house and I stayed in the house. Now, it wasn't like we were furious with each other. It was more like everything had moved so quickly from our first meeting that we both felt like we needed to step back and make sure that this was what we really wanted. It didn't take more than a day for me to realize that the separation wasn't what I wanted. I would come home to that empty house and think about Camry. I'd get up in the morning and think about Camry. I knew then that all I wanted was to be with Camry and build a family with her, and I would do anything and everything to make that a reality. We stayed apart for about a week. Then we both admitted that we needed to be together. Camry came back to the house, and we've been together ever since. It's not that we've never had another argument. We disagree like every couple, but the decision we made to be there for each other has never wavered. Even though we didn't formalize our relationship with marriage for a few more years, we had made a commitment to each other right then and there. This was for the rest of our lives, no matter what. It was that commitment that has helped us get through the darkest of days, and it's that commitment that keeps me going now. Even when Camry doesn't remember how or when we made a commitment, she knows we have a commitment, and she knows that neither of us will ever let it go.
sure you get every last inch of that rug that's exposed, okay? You done? Okay. Let's go. Well, there you go. Committed marriage. How about that? It's something to strive for sure. Easier for some than others. Anyway, next episode shouldn't be too long because we've already got it, the recorded chapter. Just gotta put it together. Okay, love you guys, and see you soon, hopefully. Bye.